Ama full sessizlik, tamam mı? Okay, inshallah, we can start then, since the time is here. Also, if inshallah, Dr. Kalin is ready in a couple of minutes.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear professor. Good to have you. Good to have you with us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa
Wa alaikum
barakatuh.
salam. Thank you. Good to see you all.
Great to see you here with us. I hope you're doing good, inshallah.
Well, trying to be as good as one can be under the circumstances, given the developments in Jerusalem, Al-Quds,
Indeed.
and the Palestinian territories, and the rest of the Muslim world.
Indeed.
Unfortunately.
Indeed, sir. Well, we pray, inshallah, that Allah gives resilience and strength and protects our brothers in Palestine. And we hope that the occupation ends soon and that we see better days in the future. And for that, inshallah. Without ado further, I'll start this session, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا عبد الله مبعوث رحمة للعالمين. Today, we have a very distinguished guest, Professor Ibrahim Kalin, who's not only a spokesperson of the president, but he's a professor of philosophy, his security strategy advisor, and much, much more, which you'll hear later from our moderator. But I just wanted to be here and welcome you all as a managing director of this community. And inshallah, our brother Adam Ben Saeed will moderate this session. Adam Ben Saeed is a graduate of political sciences from IIUM in Malaysia, you all know. He's currently doing political sciences with a focus on security studies, master's at the Boğaziçi Bosphorus University, and he's an investigative journalist at TRT World. He also is the former senior manager of policy and strategy at the Organization of Islamic Cooperation Youth Forum and served as an economic and development researcher for the OIC. Adam is also a public speaker, author, and thinker who concerns himself most with the strategic questions, capabilities, dilemmas, and capacities of the Muslim world that needs to address in this present or future. Without you further, I'll let Adam, inshallah, start and moderate this session. And in the end, inshallah, we're going to have a short Q&A session. Without you further, Adam, please, the floor is yours.
Barakallahu feek. Jazakallah khair. Professor Ibrahim Kalin, it's an honor to have you with us today. I think everybody here is a deep fan of yours, and I will say that your reputation precedes you, not only on the world stage for the statements that you've taken, but I think you are among the people that I know. You have the most dedicated students who speak your praise, but spread your knowledge, which is more important.
Thank you.
Alhamdulillah, may we all be blessed in that respect. For our dear guests, thank you for joining us at this event, which is held by the Istanbul Muslim Collective. Before we go into more about that, I will emphasize that this session, because it's Ramadan, will be short, sweet, and to the point. As you well know, Ibrahim Kalin, Professor Hojam Ibrahim Kalin, has the almost supernatural ability to be able to expound on any subject at length for as long as necessary. So we will have mercy on you in Ramadan, and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible on issues that are deeply relevant to you and to us as well. For those of you who are not aware of Dr. Professor Ibrahim Kalin, he is the presidential spokesperson, a former and a prolific writer to do with the international ethics and whatnot. On an interesting note as well, we'll be fascinated to know that he is a bit of a Renaissance man. And if you haven't watched his nasheeds on a thinker and an artist at the same time, and we're deeply grateful to have you with us here today and to benefit from your knowledge and wisdom. Barakallahu feek. To get into the program for today, I want to begin by talking about IMC, the Istanbul Muslim Collective. For some of you, this may be the first time you hear about it. It's essentially a group of Muslim youth that recognize Istanbul is the center of the Muslim East and the West, New York City, and its distribution of ideas can happen. And it has three essential goals, which is to enhance the thought of Muslim youth, to teach them service and volunteerism, to facilitate companionship and sohbat. And in this regard, they tours bringing youth back to nature, hikes, camps, cultural activities, book clubs, advanced and introductory book clubs on issue of Islamic philosophy of Ummah and whatnot. And essentially, it's a very varied mixed community that meets regularly. Unfortunately, because of COVID, they've had to reduce some of their activities, but I urge you all to follow them on Instagram, and I guarantee that you will find your people if you attend some of their events, as many of us have. But without further ado, let's get to the burning questions. And Dr. Ibrahim Kalin, please bear with us, because some of this may be a bit alternative, or I'm not going to ask you the usual questions about the international order and so on. Most important to me for tonight, I want the youth that are listening to benefit from in the manner that you I think Tahiri muted me by accident, no problem. So let's begin. I want to start by sharing a small personal story. On August 28th, 1993, when you were in Malaysia, you visited a hospital in Petaling Jaya. You visited two Algerian students who had a son at that time, and you were very active in Malaysia, along with many other senior Turkish figures in the community who generally made IAUM what it is today. The legacy lives on, alhamdulillah. And I happened to be in that room. I think there is a picture somewhere as well, and it's cherished. But I will say that many of us, my story is not singular or unique, that we have all been influenced by this ummatic spirit that brings Turkey and Algeria and Malaysia and Africa all together in the spirit of common service in Islam. So it's well met, and we're all happy to be here. So let's begin with that, inshallah. Dr. Cullen, let's begin with a macro view of the state of the Muslim world. And as I said, I have many questions to go through, so please answer as you see fit, in any manner you see fit. This is particularly relevant given the conditions of the Muslim world, not only Palestine, but the Rohingya and whatnot. And personally, I believe in practicality. It's not enough to say that situations are bad. We must ask ourselves, what is our individual responsibility? What is our collective responsibility? And most importantly, for the youth that are listening today, what can they do, conscious of their development and their growth in the face of these challenges? So in your opinion, what is the state of the Muslim world right now? What is the state of the Ummah? If somebody could kindly unmute our speaker. Okay, I'll do it myself.
Professor, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, okay. So now you can hear me?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you, Adam, for this kind words and introduction, and thank you, Mohammed, for organizing this event. I want to thank the Istanbul Muslim Collective for holding this session tonight. It happened to come right in the middle of another period, unfortunately, in the rather sad story of Jerusalem and Palestine in the modern period. And we'll probably have a chance to talk about that. We've been dealing with that issue since well over the last couple of days very intensely. I'll come to that because we just heard a few hours ago that Israeli planes attacked Gaza, killing 9 people, including 3 children. And we strongly condemn these attacks again in the strongest terms possible. And it shows again the extent of Israeli brutality in the face of civilians or holy months, values they never recognize, values which they think only hold for themselves. And I think this is one issue that we have to think about. And my main question for all of us to think tonight will be the following question: how to protect what you value? What do you do to protect what you consider to be your most valuable principles, ideas, values that you cherish, what you consider to be part of your heritage? I will come to that question for all of us to think about. As far as the state of the Muslim world, Muslim Ummah is concerned, I want us to go back to the 11th and 12th centuries when the Muslim world was under attack from the Mongol invasion. The Mongolians came, especially in the 13th century, with brutal force, as you know, coming out of Central Asia, ending the Abbasid Empire, which was the greatest empire until that time, in 1258, sacking the city of Baghdad, which was the greatest city in the world at that time, and everything in between Central Asia, from the Khorasan region all the way to Baghdad, Mesopotamia, and all the way, in fact, Anatolia and beyond. The Mongol invasion led to incredible, unspeakable violence and destruction and death and agony and pain in the Muslim world. It led to the end of many states, the largest of which was the Abbasid Empire, but there were many other smaller states in between. And the Mongol herds, invaders, fighters, they basically destroyed everything that came their way. But what happened 10, 15 years after the death of Genghis Khan, who was the leader of the Mongolian state or empire? They just disappeared. Nobody even talked about the Mongolians anymore. The Muslim world was so strong in terms of its infrastructure and institutions and belief and values and principles, scholarship and art and architecture and urban planning, trade, diplomacy, and other fields, that it was able to overcome this incredible destruction wrought upon them by the Mongol invasions. The Mongols, of course, were remembered with horror. What they did in Baghdad and beyond continued to be remembered and talked about. But what really lasted, what really rebuilt the Muslim world was people like Mevlana, Yunus Emre, Ghazali, Suhrawardi, Nasiruddin Tusi, and many other luminaries and great scholars and great soldiers and commanders, statesmen, and many others. When you face this kind of a political destruction or military onslaught, what really keeps you going is your deeper values. This is how the Muslim world survived these attacks. Interestingly, 13th century is also the meeting point of the end of the Crusades, because a century before, the Crusaders launched a number of attacks and crusades into the Muslim world. In fact, they took Jerusalem, if you remember, in 1098. Well, in 1099, when Pope Urban II launched the first crusade in 1098, a year later, the Crusaders took over Jerusalem. And Jerusalem remained under Christian rule until Salahuddin Ayyubi came along, and 1147, he took the city back from the Crusaders in the Battle of Hattin. And since then, until 1917, Jerusalem and the Palestinian areas remain under Muslim control. And these were the best times for Jerusalem, where Jews, Muslims, Christians lived together. and they nourished a culture of coexistence for centuries. Every religious community and even every sect under that religious community had religious freedom and pluralism practiced in their own daily lives. From the West, you had the Crusaders coming to the Muslim world in the 12th century and kind of also into the 13th century. And then you had the Mongol invasion coming from the East. And at one point, the Crusaders and the Mongolians, actually the Mongol invaders, were hoping to crush the Muslim world like a sandwich and form some kind of an unholy alliance to wipe out the Muslim world. It didn't work. Neither the Crusaders nor the Mongol invaders actually were strong enough to destroy the Muslim world. They caused a lot of pain and destruction, no doubt. They killed thousands of people, no doubt. They destroyed many libraries and cities. There's no doubt about that. But the Muslim world was so resilient, was so strong, that it was able to overcome the successive attacks by the Crusaders and the Mongol invaders one after another. And in fact, right after that, right after those dark times, Muslim world witnessed some of its brightest moments in philosophy, in arts, in urban planning, in architecture, in trade, and many other areas. Many other states were formed after that, after the 13th century, after the end of the Abbasid Empire. You had the Seljukids, you had the Ottomans, you had the Safavids, you had many other states, Mamluks and others around the world. You had Andalusia, in the far western part of the Muslim world. Therefore, when you look at history from this point of view, we are going through a difficult period in the history of the Ummah right now. There is a lot of disunity, there is a lot of destruction, there is a lot of self-inflicted wounds in the Muslim world at the moment. We are being attacked by various forces, including what you are seeing now in Jerusalem, in the Palestinian territories, but also all the way from Myanmar to Syria to many other parts of the Muslim world. There is a lack of political leadership and vision to unite the Muslim world, to lead them to a common goal. We lack a common story. We lack a common narrative. Even though we use the words like ummah, unity, tawheed, wahda, the reality is that, in fact, we don't have either the political or the intellectual, philosophical components of what we might call our joint common story. We lack that at the moment because everybody is now forming or writing their own story. Nationalism has crept into our bloodlines. Nation state concepts have taken over our notions, our concepts of international, transnational perspectives. In fact, the very concept of ummah requires you to think internationally. If you believe in a larger Muslim world, you have to be an internationalist in your perspective as well as in your practices. And this internationalism, by the way, doesn't come at the expense of specific nation state-based issues and problems. To the contrary, it helps you to resolve your problems, your issues at the nation state level, at the national level, or other levels. In fact, internationalism is something that you cannot escape at a time when everything has become intertwined, when the age of globalization has taken over. Therefore, our perspective, first of all, must be internationalized again. How to think internationally is not simply about paying attention to or following developments in various parts of the world. It's rather to have a common perspective. So when something happens in Myanmar, something happens in Jerusalem, something happens in the Balkans, something happens in Somalia, in Africa, something happens in Syria or somewhere else, you have a perspective, but also you have people who believe in the same perspective. And you think in such a way that you try to influence the international system to the extent that is possible. This we are lacking in the Muslim world at the moment. Therefore, the concept of ummah needs to be critically evaluated, studied, deepened, uh, and expand it in various fields. And this is a long-term struggle. At the very basis of this lies this fundamental question. What do you do to protect what you consider to be your most valuable principles and ideas? How do you protect what you consider to be your most valuable treasures? This could be Jerusalem, this could be Masjid al-Aqsa, this could be the Muslim heritage in Europe, in southern Spain, or in Syria, or in Somalia, or in India or Pakistan. But the question is how to protect what you value. This requires, of course, a multidimensional approach, especially for my younger brothers and sisters. I think it's really important for them to pay attention to how much they can do in terms of educating themselves about all these issues, not having the kind of superficial information or knowledge about what's happening here and there, but rather a deeper understanding of, say, for example, the suffering of Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. Consider yourself to be the only person in the world appearing before the world stage at the UN or some kind of an international audience and explaining to them the suffering of Rohingya Muslims or the Palestinian cause or the situation in Africa. Each of you must be intellectually fit and equipped with the kind of knowledge, with the kind of information, intellectual skills to be able to make a case for each of these issues and areas. It's only through that kind of an understanding that we can claim to protect what we value. Educating yourself about this, but also educating other people, telling our own stories. We lack in our ability to tell our own story, partly because we don't have a joint story yet. Each of us has parts and bits and pieces of that story here and there. What needs to be done is to bring all those pieces together so that when someone from Somalia speaks to someone from Bosnia, when someone from Turkey speaks to someone in Kazakhstan, someone speaks to someone from Pakistan speaks to someone in the United States or in Europe, in London or Paris, you see there is that connection. There's a kind of natural connection. That conversation needs to be deepened. That conversation needs to be substantiated. This is how we are going to build this common story. We tend to forget our common historical references, again, to understand our current problems. Take the example of Jerusalem. We have to do more, and there is much more we can do to help our Palestinian brothers and sisters. The Israelis have been trying for a long time to make a case for a land without people and for a people without a land, claiming that the Palestinians don't have a claim to the Palestinian lands. And in fact, there is no such thing as a Palestinian nation. They say they are Arabs, and there are 22 Arab countries. And deep down, their claim, their plan is that Palestinians should go to these different Muslim Arab countries. Jordan should accept some of them, Egypt should accept some others, and others should go to other oil-rich Arab countries, Gulf countries. And this is how you solve the Palestinian problem. This is what lies deep in the back of their minds. First of all, we have to recognize that there is a people called the Palestinian people. There is a land called Palestine, and they have been living under occupation. We have to reject this Israeli narrative that Palestine, and especially Jerusalem, became important for Muslims only after the establishment of the State of Israel. I heard this from many Zionist propagandists, that this argument, that Jerusalem, in fact, or Masjid al-Aqsa was never important for Muslims. It was never the first Qibla of Muslims. It was never mentioned in the Quran. It was never really of any significance in Islamic history until establishment of the State of Israel. But nothing could be further from the truth, right? We are talking about the first Qibla of Muslims, Masjid al-Aqsa. It's mentioned in the Quran. We are talking about the incident of Miraj, where it happened, where our Prophet ﷺ ascended into the heavens. We are talking about the story of Salah ad-Din Ayyubi and the rest of this. I don't have to repeat this here. But the point is that they have been able to get this narrative and story out there and present it to the Western audiences. And unfortunately, the vast majority of the Western people, Europeans and Americans, bought into that story. Now they're claiming that, yeah, Palestinians may exist here and there, but you see they're all violent. And they don't have the genes of democracy. Arabs like to be ruled by autocrats, by dictators. They don't have a culture of democracy or multiculturalism. And look how they are running their affairs in Muslim countries, and especially the Arab countries. Therefore, the claim by the Palestinians for democracy, human rights, civil liberties is simply something that was put together to reject the state of Israel. This is the other narrative that they've been kind of spreading for decades again. And we have to tell the world that, in fact, the Palestinians have been wanting to hold their elections for the last 15 years. And it is Israel as the occupying power that's been preventing the Palestinians from holding elections in their own land. Remember what happened in 2005 when the Palestinians went for elections. It was, I think, during the Bush term in the United States. They didn't like the outcome of the elections. They canceled the elections and they did everything in their capacity to undermine the democratic electoral processes ever since then. This, unfortunately, has not changed for the last 15 years. As a result of this, the Palestinians came together many times, and finally they established their national unity to hold elections. And the Israelis did it again. This time they said the Palestinian residents of East Jerusalem will not be allowed to vote. Why? Because they claim that Jerusalem is the eternal capital of Israel. Any political activity, such as voting, will have to be under Israeli rule. Since the Palestinians don't have any entitlement to Jerusalem, according to their understanding, they cannot hold these elections. After months of weeks of negotiations and pressure, the Israelis agreed some kind of an agreement, not fully exactly, to allow the Palestinians to have electronic vote. And the Palestinians rightly rejected it. They said, how can we not allow to vote in person in our own lands? This will be endorsing the Israeli narrative that, in fact, all of Jerusalem belongs to Israel. No, Jerusalem is not the eternal capital of Israel. We will never give up on Jerusalem. We will never give up on the Palestinian cause. And if anyone in the Western world, in Europe or the United States or somewhere else, think that Israel is a democracy because Israel likes to present itself as the only democracy in the Middle East, they should come back and look at what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians, what they're doing to the Israeli citizens of Palestinian origin, what kind of discriminations they're facing on a single daily basis, what they're doing to other Palestinians in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and in Gaza. And it's Israel that's been preventing the Palestinians from holding elections. It's not the other way around. But the narrative goes that, you see, the Arabs, they're not inclined, they're not ready for democracy. When Arab Spring began, the Zionist, pro-Israeli, Orientalist camp asked this cynical question. They said, well, you know, there are some movements, popular uprisings happening in across the Arab world. But the question is, yeah, we know that they're demanding freedom and dignity and equality and all of that. But the question is the Arab world ready for democracy? And they categorically said, no, they're not ready for democracy. because they are too much entrenched in an autocratic mindset, and they've been living under secular dictators for many years. And in fact, that's good for the West. We should let them stay like that. When I confronted these people, I asked them one simple question. I said, look, as far as the Arab countries are concerned, since you're talking about the Arabs, yes, Arabs are ready for democracy. The question is whether you are ready for democracy in the Muslim world, whether you are ready for democracy in the Arab world. And apparently you're not. And they did everything to reverse the gains and the successes of those popular movements back in 2010, 11, 12. You know the rest of this story. Now, the Israelis are still using this narrative again today to attack the Palestinian cause and those who defend it. Our response, I think, must be very clear. The Palestinians want democracy and elections in their own land with dignity, with freedom. And the so-called vanguards of democracy in the Western world must pay attention to what Israel is doing to undermine democracy and the Palestinian demands for freedom in the Palestinian territories. Now,
Professor, if I may,
yeah,
just to catch up with what you're saying, because mashallah, there's a lot of, I don't have to unpack it, you explained it perfectly, but there's a lot that we do have to cover. Barakallah feek. You actually answered at least 6 questions that I was going to ask you, so thank you for making my job easy tonight. The issue that you mentioned, and I want to get more specific in this, when you're talking about the era of globalization that we live in, and the change in values and the lack of narratives and the vacuum of intellectual thought, personally, it's something I relate to a lot, because as you said, it's not enough to have a superficial understanding of these things when you're standing in the UN General Assembly or when writing a policy paper, and even when confronting the propaganda that comes from the Israeli side. Personally, as a debater and as a journalist, I can tell you that negating or refuting the point is not simply countering it, but coming up with a better narrative at the heart of it. But I'm also deeply conscious of the incredible opportunity that we have with you here and all these youth listening on Facebook and elsewhere. So with your permission, I'd like to move on to a more rapid fire style of questioning, where you give us some nuggets of your wisdom on a selected menu of different subjects, if you don't mind. Professor Kalin, in terms of systemic change in the international arena, you have been very vocal about the inequality in the international order. And for many of the Muslim youth that grew up in this generation, the issue of change is something that we've only heard about from previous generations. How was change achieved? Social organization, mobilization, and so forth. The internet as a great disruptor is an incredible opportunity for the Ummah, because it links us and networks us in a way that was genuinely not possible only 20, 30, 40 years ago. So on that subject, again, as somebody who's come from the OIC and is aware of the difference between practical policy, strategy, statesmanship, and theory, what do you have to say to the youth listening today on basically being a part of this change from the grassroots level and aspiring to more?
2 things. Number one, modernity has been a Eurocentric project from the very beginning. It has always been a top-down process, has never really lost its deeply ingrained quality of being a Eurocentric project. The Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, the French Revolution, and the remnants of that whole process in the 18th and 19th centuries have led to a concept of world order, an international system that has remained Eurocentric throughout. Globalization, in fact, did not change that too much. It certainly gave the appearance of many other actors and players coming into the game. But in reality, if you look at what really gets circulated in the name of globalization, is again largely Eurocentric, Western-centric. To give you an example, a very accomplished musician from Pakistan or India simply does not have the tools to compete with the music world of Michael Jackson's and Madonna's and this and that. You have a very talented filmmaker, a scriptwriter, or an actor or actress from Africa or from the Balkans. She simply does not have the means to compete with the multi-billion-dollar Hollywood sector and system and structure. What really gets circulated remains more or less Eurocentric. So my first point is that you have to understand how deep Eurocentrism goes and find a way to deconstruct it in your own mindset, in your own taste, in your own understanding of history, of culture. When I say Eurocentrism, I do not simply mean the fact that power has largely concentrated at the hands of Western nations. I do not mean simply the political or economic power or military power. What I mean is the very notions of culture, identity, person, freedom, dignity, artistic taste, literature, poetry, music, cinema, aesthetic, understanding, all of these things have been shaped by this very deeply founded current of Eurocentrism. Give you an example. If I were to ask you, any one of you, a question about the beginnings of philosophy, where did philosophy begin? I'm sure, 99% of the time, the answer will be, yes, of course, it all began in ancient Greek. Because this is what we are taught at high schools, at universities. Very difficult to change this mindset, to go back, in fact, to the Greeks, to realize that the Greeks themselves considered Greek period to be a decadence of philosophy. They, in fact, looked at ancient Egypt, the Mediterranean, and other parts of the world as the real storehouse of wisdom. Plato considered his term, his time, to be end of philosophy. He said, we are coming to the end of philosophy. Now we are considering the Greeks to be the beginning of philosophy. It's a completely different, understanding of even the history of philosophy. Art, again, when I say, give me a couple of examples about the world of art. I'm sure, again, 99% of the time, the images that come to our minds, the examples that come to our mind will be mostly from the Western artistic tradition. I don't have anything against Western art. Don't get me wrong. I think they have produced some of the greatest work of art in history, no doubt. But if anyone claims that Western art or Western classical music is universal music, but Turkish or Pakistani music or Syrian music is ethnic music, then I say, wow, no, let's stop here. That's Eurocentrism. What really defines music produced by a German or French composer in the, say, 17th or 18th century in Europe as universal versus what defines, say, my musical tradition or the beautiful Qawwali tradition of Pakistan or the ragas of India as ethnic music is something that needs deeper understanding and questioning. That's number one. I think we really have to spend more time on this to see the extent of this Eurocentrism. Number two, in this age of globalization, we are sometimes told that we also live in the age of information. There is a lot of misconception there also. We confuse knowledge with information, and we also confuse wisdom with knowledge. It's true that we live in an age of information where you have endless stream of information out there on the internet and other places. And information is a bulk of statistics and numbers and facts out there, which you can utilize to understand something. But knowledge is something different. It's a higher degree of understanding. It requires a systematic understanding of these bits and pieces of facts and numbers, what we call information. What we need is knowledge, but more importantly and more deeply, what we need now is wisdom. That is, knowing what to do with the knowledge that you have, knowing the meaning
On that subject
of the concept
Professor
of
Kalin.
What is good, what is true, and what is beautiful. And it's only by understanding these three concepts, the good, the true, and the beautiful, that we can understand the meaning of wisdom. And we're lacking that too in our understanding of the world, as well as, you know, the state in which we find ourselves as individuals.
For those of us who are not aware, Professor Kalin has written extensively on the concept of the other, and honestly, it's very refreshing to hear you say this. But I want to bring this full circle to something that a few very dear friends of mine were discussing, and that was the issue of civilizational responsibility. And it comes down to having knowledge and the wisdom to act on it. Essentially, we came to the conclusion that because we are aware and we are conscious, we have responsibility. In a time where, honestly, the signaling and the messaging that we get, we're sold a different narrative. Here's the comfortable life. Live for yourself. Live as just the individual. Leave these values, adopt these new values. The West is the fountain of all knowledge and technology, and so on and so forth. But facing this civilizational responsibility to live up to the Ummah, as you said, imagine that you are sitting in the UN General Assembly, for instance, as the only person that is representing the issue of the Rohingya, for instance. That is a very heavy responsibility for a lot of youth to stomach today. And well, the gist of it, what I want to get to essentially is that knowing is one thing, acting is another. How did you, from your journey throughout your youth, how did you come to where you are today? What profound realizations drove you? Was it your education, your culture, your family? Share with us some of this, please.
I think I've been blessed with a thirst for knowledge from a very early age on. I always wanted to know and kind of get deeper into anything that I wanted to know, whether it was sports or culture or art or philosophy or history, because I always felt like, you know, having a superficial knowledge about anything will not really satisfy my my mind. It will not satisfy my soul. A deeper understanding always allows you to open up your mind, your horizon to something new. And in a sense, you come a full circle, just like Socrates did, when he said the only thing he knows is that he doesn't know anything. Um, you know, even this statement itself occupied my mind for many, many years. I mean, at its face value, it's a very simple statement. You know, this man is being very humble. It's more than that. I think Socrates was being not only humble, but also very sarcastic, because he was the most knowledgeable man of his time. He was definitely the most accomplished philosopher and thinker of his time. And for him to be able to say that in a society in which the sophists were selling their knowledge for money and were willing to use their knowledge of philosophy, of logic, of rhetoric, of politics, etc., to be used and manipulated for short-term political gains. He was standing up to that stream of thought and that way of life. And when he said that the only thing he knows is that he doesn't know anything, means that in fact he has seen the ocean of knowledge. He came to the shore of that infinite ocean of knowledge, where he realized that what he had was only just a drop. It was just a bucket of water that he had, even though he was the most knowledgeable man, most sophisticated man of his time. That really gave me a further drive to go deeper into this, you know, further understanding and exploration and investigation of the issues that had occupied my mind. And then, you know, I remember what Mevlana said, Jalaluddin Rumi said, if you want the pearl, you really have to be a diver. If you want to play with little rocks here and there, you know, along the shore, that's fine. I think you can spend time with that. But if you are really a pearl hunter, and that is, you want to get the most valuable thing from the ocean, from the sea, you have to know how to dive. And diving means that you have to understand the depths of the ocean, but also you have to protect yourself. Because when you dive, you know, you don't want to get hit. You want to come up again, you know, healthy and strong. And of course, with a pearl in your hand. That means discipline. That means self-discipline. That means studying. That also means that you get your priorities right. You know, you have to have your own priorities in your life. Life is too short from one point of view. It's long from another point of view, but usually for us, the mortals, life is short. You can spend your life qualitatively on one or two things, and I think you will have a good life if you are really good at what you're doing. Whether you're a carpenter or a politician or a musician, you're really good at what you do. And I think that's all that matters. You know, fame, popularity, money, these things are secondary compared to the pleasure and the contentment you get from doing something right and properly and being an example to others and being able to share it with others. That sense of contentment and pleasure is more valuable than anything else you can imagine. And that requires depth. You really have to focus, concentrate. And here comes another major challenge that we face in the modern world. In the world in which we live, where these images and messages and notifications buzz around, and we are bombarded constantly by this, flickering of lights and messages and this and that, it's next to impossible to concentrate on something for even 2-3 minutes. There is this urge of the next thing that is constantly coming at us. The next headline, the next message, the next tweet, the next whatever. And actually you miss the present. Being in the moment becomes a very difficult thing to do. Live the moment, carpe diem, becomes an art to be studied and learned. But if you want to deepen in something, have depth in anything, you really have to know how to concentrate on that thing. And that means knowing what to include in your life and what to exclude. If you want to be a doctor, you want to spend time on studying medicine, right? And that means that you will not have as much time, say, for the history of tennis. Okay, you may have an interest in the history of tennis, that's fine, as a personal hobby. That's perfectly all right. But if you want to be a doctor, you want to spend more of your time on studying medical documents, right? If you want to be a philosopher or politician or an engineer, you have to really concentrate, on that specific topic. And all great religious traditions and mystical traditions have developed different ways of teaching you how to concentrate. Prayers, for example, invocations, there are ways of teaching you how to concentrate, how to be present in the moment, how to remain present in the moment. And it's only by staying in the moment that you can appreciate what you have, and you don't think about what you missed. Because if your mind is constantly dislocated and it's wandering around without any anchor point, then basically you are undermining the moment you have too. And spread this to your whole life, and you suddenly realize 40, 50 years later, you have spent your whole life just going around, wandering around without an anchor point. It means that if you think that you can go anywhere, you end up going nowhere. You have to have a goal. You have to have an anchor point.
Professor Kalin, on the subject of being grounded, and also to bring this back to the wonderful words you said when you quoted Socrates, and he said that essentially, I know nothing, Yani. Isn't it a bit of a clash between the Western scientific positivist approach versus the deeply humble Islamic approach that the more I learn, the more I realize that I do not know? But specifically, I want to ask you this. What you've mentioned is excellent, and I do hope that everybody can apply this in their life. But there is one major pitfall I think you would be in a perfect position to warn against, and that is the subject of humility and compassion and sincerity in the work that we do. I think everybody here recognizes that, especially in an interconnected, globalized world, you can't just be a jack of all trades. You have to do one thing, and you have to do it very well because the competition is so great. And I've seen this as a personal experience, when you graduate from IAUM and you have a lot of ideals and some knowledge, but not much practical knowledge, in actual one-on-one discussions with the other side, where it's not simply a deconstructive talk to debate for the sake of debating, but where you're actually trying to engage somebody and convince them, you will get wasted if you do not know deep knowledge, deep reflection, instead of this jumping from one thing to another. But I do notice that because of the lack of the traditional upbringing, the seeking of knowledge, the manhaj, the methodology of seeking knowledge in Islam, it's very often to get confused or to get misled, where nobody takes the youth aside and says, for instance, yani, ikhlas, sincerity, your intentions matter. If your heart is not in the right place, you're doing this for the wrong reason, and the effects in itself take us to a very different place. I was hoping you could comment about that, because I'm sure you have a lot to offer.
One of the things that happened to modern man was to divide his mind and his heart into two major camps, and have the two, in fact, fight against each other for competition and for domination. Is it our minds or is it our hearts? I think one of the greatest mistakes that modern epistemology has made was to sentimentalize the heart and divest the human mind, human reason, of its emotional, compassionate dimension. So we ended up with a mind that is cold, soulless, that is hard, that is regimented, but has no compassion in it. And then we ended up with a concept of heart that doesn't think, that is pure sentimentality, based on pure emotion. And we have the clash of these two. And of course, we lost everything in between. In fact, human being is a whole. When I think of myself, I do not think of my hand as something that is separate from me. I do not think of my eyes or my ears as something separate from my own whole being, because I experience myself as a whole, and my experience of the world around me is also based on that kind of a holistic understanding. When I hear something, when I see something, when I touch something that is hot or cold, my experience is based on this kind of holistic understanding. Now, we have lost that unity and this holistic perspective. Therefore, what we do with our minds most of the time in the modern world goes against what our hearts think, what our hearts feel. And then we say, well, maybe this is rationally right, but morally wrong. But how can you have the human mind do something that is considered to be right from a purely logical point of view, but horribly wrong from a moral point of view? What kind of a division, dichotomy, almost schizophrenic understanding of an individual, of the human person and a culture it will create? Just look how this has seeped into modern culture. What the modern world, modern economy, modern science and technology, educational systems, and other things do on a daily basis, how they are considered to be rationally necessary, profitable, effective, efficient, and how they are to be tested, and most of the time fail in face of moral, ethical principles and values. And you look at the world has never been richer in terms of its material wealth. We live in a very wealthy, rich world. But we have also the level of poverty and injustice that we have never seen in the history of humanity. You have this incredible technological, scientific capacities, new innovations, and many other abilities, yet they end up failing to speak to and address and solve the basic problems of humanity, from refugees to poverty and pandemics and endemics and many other global problems. This really goes back to the very essence of this issue. what are your guiding principles and values? We stop thinking in terms of what is good, what is beautiful, what is right in and of itself. We've been thinking more in terms of profit, efficiency, numbers, statistics, programs, development, and all these things, as if these are soulless goals without any meaning and purpose in them. And in fact, we are moving more and more in the path of nihilism, where we are told again and again that life does not have any meaning, the universe does not have any intrinsic meaning. You just have to go out there, live your life, and don't get traumatized by a search for meaning. But we know that we are meaning-driven beings. We cannot live without meaning. The fact that we are doing this conversation right now must have a meaning for us so that we can be here and do this rather than something else. Because we are choosing to do this, and my choice must be based on some kind of a meaning and value. How can I do anything as a human person with intelligence and will that does not have any meaning for me? Then I'm no longer a human person.
Professor
I'm no
Kalin.
longer a being with intelligence.
Professor Colin, I did promise not to take too much of your time in Ramadan, and I'd like to live up to that. So I'll ask you one or two questions, and then as you wish, Yani, we'll go from where you'd like. Specifically, and I'm sure this is a question you've never been asked before, we're talking about the vacuum of meaning, of narrative, the disillusionment. And as you said, we do live in a time where we live more comfortably than any king in the medieval past or any pharaoh ever could. But at the same time, the obsession with materialism has utterly ravaged the side of the soul, of the spirit, of beauty and aesthetics, of even service to somebody else beyond me, the individual. We've compartmentalized ourselves in that sense. But I do want to ask you something, because this is something that a lot of youth face now, and it's partially relevant to the things you're talking about. I'm sure the men and the women in this chat will understand it, will appreciate it. If you don't mind, and this is a bit of a personal question again, how do you see the idea of Islamic masculinity? Because again, we live in a very turbulent time, and you warned about going too deep into knowledge that essentially is not ours, and perhaps picking up things that we have no business picking up. You are our elder. You're a deeply wise person, a very successful person in life in almost every sphere, as we know, and we look up to you. And we'd like to benefit from your experience here. So what would you have to say to the youth, to both men and women, Yani? How do you see the healthy view of masculinity in the context of civilizational duty, of family, of ummah, of society, and all these sort of aspects?
Well, I mean, we were created by God as equal beings, and it's only male and female, their unity, that gives us, a meaningful life. I don't think either masculinity or femininity can claim any exclusive uh, dominion or domination in the world. It's only the combination of the two, and it's in the nature of God's creation. And in fact, we were created, our ancestors, Adam and Eve were created together. Unlike some older Christian and some Jewish narratives, Eve was not created out of the bones of Adam. In fact, they were created together equal. This is our belief, and they set on this journey of earthly life together from the very beginning. And it was only through their unity, their friendship, their companionship, their love, their dedication to each other that made earthly life meaningful. That's how our story begins. We don't have the original sin as you have it in Christianity. We don't have the superiority of one gender over other as you have it in other traditions. And at the end of the day, when all this is over, when we die and when we go to the world of eternity and appear before God, and we will be held accountable again as equal individual human beings with the intelligence and will that God has given to male and female, to everybody. I will never be in a position to claim any superiority to anyone else because simply I happen to be a man. Or a woman will never be in a position to claim superiority to someone else because she happens to be a woman. What really matters is what we do with the blessings, with the abilities that we are presented with the intelligence. I never believed that male intelligence is higher than female intelligence, or this quality in the male is higher. Yeah, I mean, there are certain propensities, inclinations in our natures. But look, there is a combination of the two. It's like the yin yang. I mean, there is as much masculinity in the feminine form, and there is as much femininity in the masculine form. It's only the combination, the unity of the two that gives us the human person, human society, human culture. I think we have to understand this, especially coming from the Islamic tradition, more than anyone else, because if you look at the early Muslim community, the life of the Prophet ﷺ, how they interacted as men and women, and how they fought, for example, against injustice, against poverty, against oppression in Mecca, in Medina, and beyond. It was never a question of men or women doing this exclusively or doing that. Now, today we have to remember this. This tradition is very rich tradition, and understand the metaphysical foundations of the feminine and masculine qualities, the qualities of majesty as well as beauty, the qualities of strength as well as mercy, the qualities of steadfastness as well as beauty and compassion for each other. And it's only by a combination of the two. Ibn al-Arabi has said this beautifully in another context when he was discussing the question of tanzih and tashbih. It's an old theological debate in the Kalam circles, where some scholars claim that God is so transcendent, absolute, that he cannot be likened, he cannot be compared to anything we can imagine. So that was the pole of tanzih, transcendence. But that rendered danger of pushing God too far from his creation, as if like God was so transcendent that he was no longer accessible. He turned into a being to whom we cannot even pray anymore because he's so transcendent. On the other hand, you had the tashbih, where they said God is so close, he's here, he's just like you and me, he's closer to us than our jugular vein, quoting from the Quran, etc. And he said, God cannot be that transcendent and otherly, he's here. But then that also ran the risk of anthropomorphizing the divine, that is turning God into some kind of a human being or human person. And that debate went on for a long time. Ibn Arabi came along and, he said, look, the true perspective is the perspective of what he called the perspective of the man with two eyes. Zul Ainain, he said. The true believer sees God with his right hand as totally transcendent, and with his left eye as imminent, here, close, and nearby. And what you see with your two eyes is not two things, but one. And in fact, you need your both eyes to be able to see something properly, with depth, with width, with color, with perspective, with understanding. If you close your one eye to the pole of transcendence or to the pole of tashbih, then you lose half of reality. You lose depth, you lose dimension, you lose perspective. Same goes true for male and female perspective. It's only by a combination of the two that we can see things properly. If you close your one eye, and in fact, you lose half of your perspective, your depth.
Beautifully put, Professor. It seems like a common theme of tonight's discussion is holism in everything, whether or not distinguishing between the hand and the self, between the heart and the mind, or all the rest of it. Beautifully put. I think we can all strive towards actually seeking the divine attributes all around us. And if God has given us some mercy, he is the king of mercy, and so forth. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Ala ni'mat al-Islam ala kull hal. I want to bring the conversation back to a more serious tone and back to Turkey. And this will be my final question for you tonight. As Brother Tahiri mentioned, I focus a lot on strategic capacities, capabilities, and necessities in the Muslim world. And coming back to Turkey now, we all know that Turkey is essentially one of the foremost countries pushing the edge of technology, artificial intelligence, satellites and whatnot. And I don't mean in a symbolic way, cooperating with just an agency, but actually creating this medium and high level tech in a way that much of the Muslim world has yet to reach, given that they are still recovering from the end of post-colonial autocracies and so on. Turkey has been unique in this, in that it was spared, in some respects, it was spared the brunt of colonialism. And mashallah, yani, just the Turkish brothers and sisters that we see here, they seem very dedicated not only to themselves and their nations, but to their responsibility to their neighbors. In that context, I want to ask you about artificial intelligence and space colonization. And I do hope you haven't been asked this before. I will say this: you're undoubtedly familiar with the 2024 Artemis missions to set up a base on the moon, and I'm sure, I mean, maybe some of our viewers could benefit from this reminder. But essentially, the target for many of the Western countries is space mining, and then that brings an incredibly lucrative source of wealth to their economies, and possibly risking a sort of neo-economic colonialism again, when an asteroid of platinum or gold or whatever has like $1 trillion worth of value, and landlocked, earth-locked countries are denied this sort of expansion and the next wave of colonial. That's one. Also, the militarization of artificial intelligence. I'm asking this not in a very theoretical, abstract way, but in a very concrete manner. It feels like the Muslim world has been playing catch up, or trying to not play catch up and just go ahead all of a sudden in many respects. But these are very hard roadblocks that we still have to contend with, even if we get everything together and we pull things together and we build our civil societies and we have healthy democracy and we resolve issues of justice and inequality. So I really want to hear your thoughts on these sort of existential challenges that we will have to face in the future. And I also want to ask you, do you see any other horizon level events in the next 20 to 30 years that you would advise Muslim youth from now to start thinking about and specializing in and concerning themselves with?
Well, I mean, artificial intelligence has been with us for a long time. Well, I'm trying to understand human intelligence in the first place. I don't know much about artificial intelligence, though. The original organic intelligence, if we can have a proper understanding of it, I think that will be a big gain for humanity. But artificial intelligence is part of our lives, no doubt. But I think we have to be really careful about that too. We have the risk of alienating ourselves from the things that our hands have produced. Remember how Hegel defined alienation, and Marx picked up on it, and he said that anything humans produce with their own hands reach a point where you no longer control it. You become alienated to it. Right now, what we produce with our own hands, technology, artificial intelligence, systems, self-generating, self-thinking computers, and all of that have become such gigantic, enormous structures that we are no longer able to control them. They're beginning to control us. I think there is a serious problem there for all of us to think about really seriously. And this is not only a problem for the ethicists. I think it's a problem for scientists, for philosophers, for political leaders, and many others. The more we move in this direction of further technology, further science, in a sense, there are many benefits in that for humanity in terms of providing technological advances and medicine and drugs for diseases, etc. I don't have any problem with any of that. But also we have to be aware of the fact that the more we do, the more control we lose to the systems and structures and artificial intelligence and robots, etc. As far as the space is concerned, I mean, looking at what we have done to the world, I fear for the future of space. The last 200 years of destruction that we have brought upon the earth, upon the natural environment, is a very sad, horrible story. We are basically destroying our own lifelines. We are cutting the branch on which we are sitting. We are destroying the very air that we're breathing. We are poisoning the very water that we are drinking. And it's getting worse, unfortunately. Now, given the fact that this is what we have done to this world, this beautiful world that has been given to us as an amana, as a trust, I don't want to even fancy about what we can do, what we will do to the space. I think we have to remember that beautiful picture that was taken by the ship Odyssey, I think, what was it, Hubble, that Carl Sagan asked NASA to take back in 1983, I believe. And that space shuttle took a picture of the world from the space, farthest point in the space. And our world came off as this pale blue dot. We are just this pale blue dot in this almost infinite universe. And this is only in our own galaxy. It's estimated that there are 100 billion galaxies like ours. You know, we are just one Milky Way. There are maybe 100 billion other galaxies. And we are just this little pale blue dot, you know, in our own galaxy. And this is if this is what we did to our own world, what we will do to the space, to other planets. I hope we will act wisely. We will do better in the future. I don't want to be pessimistic about the future, but I think we really have to have a serious moral reckoning and a proper understanding of who we are, what we stand for, and where we're going if you're going to build a better future, whether in this world or in the space.
Professor Kalin, thank you so much for being with us today. For those of us that joined a bit late, tonight has been a very holistic conversation, a very deep and enjoyable conversation. We thank you greatly, and I just ask you to leave us a comment to the IMC community from you.
If I just may, before Professor Cullen continues, Professor, I want you to consider that you're talking to a community of well, more than 100 nations, maybe. These are all students, artists, professionals, even philosophers amongst us who've come from all around the world, and now they reside in Turkey. All these people, and I'm sure you'd agree with this, they see Turkey now as a focal point in the Ummah. They see that we, as a community, but also as people living in Turkey, and we believe that Turkey has now become a center for the Ummah, and that we believe that we might, you know, go forward, inshallah, a long way from this point of where we are right now. I would really like you to talk to this community, you know, give a couple of advices. As Adam said, we look up to you, we really, you know, really respect you, and we really enjoy reading your articles and books. So we'd really love you to speak to the community, bearing in mind that, you know, these people in Turkey as I said, as a focal point, and, you know, how do you see us moving forward? What are some things that we should maybe strive and struggle to, and what should these young people bear in mind as long as they're living here and they're looking forward to, you know, work and support the Ummah?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure for me to be able to speak to all brothers and sisters who come from all corners of the world, to Turkey, and those who are listening from outside Turkey. And they are always welcome, you know, in this land which has always opened its hearts and minds and its arms to anyone who came to its door with good intentions, with basic humanity. And in that sense, you know, Anatolian lands have been the lands of migrants, immigrants for centuries. In a sense, we have, I think, a beautiful story of both the Ansar and Muhajirin in these lands. Sometimes you end up being an Ansar, and circumstances lead you to a point where you become a Muhajir. And then, in fact, as a Muhajir, then you become an Ansar. The roles are reversed. But you know what remains inside your soul is this deep humanity and compassion that you have for other human beings, because they've been created by God, just like you've been created. I've been created by God, and they deserve human dignity and respect as much as, you know, I do, and many others. This is the ethics of social cohesion and culture of coexistence that we try to inculcate in Turkey. And this, I believe, is deeply rooted in our culture, in our Turkish Muslim culture. And we see this, you know, exemplified most recently in regards to the treatment of Syrian refugees who've been living in Turkey, but also many others have come from the Balkans, from Western Thrace, from the Caucasus, from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from all over the world. I think the more diverse we are, the richer we are, the more colors we have in our garden, the more beautiful it is. We learn from each other, we function. My advice will be to you all to make use of this experience, that try to learn, from others and have their perspectives reflect the better qualities of that culture, and teach you something about how can I do something better? How can I be a better person when I'm in touch with someone from another culture, from another part of the world? And there's always something that I can learn because one of the beautiful things about creation is that, and I was having this conversation with my daughters the other day, that God as the supreme artist creates every single moment, and he never repeats himself. There is no repetition in tajalli, as they said, in unveiling. And God creates at every moment, and no two things that he creates are ever the same. Just imagine, God has created and continues to create billions of people, human beings. No two human beings are exactly the same. Not even the single cell twins. They're not the same exactly. They're two different human beings. Imagine the billions and billions of flowers and insects and birds and animals and snowflakes and grains of sand. Just imagine, not two of them, not any one of them is exactly the same like the other. They're all separate, they're all different, and they're all unique and beautiful in their own state, in their own way. And God creates with this remarkable richness, diversity, and creativity without ever repeating himself. Imagine an artist, a great artist, a painter, a musician. Sometimes you feel like, well, he's repeating himself or she's repeating herself, right? And God never repeats himself in his infinite creation. Now, the least we can do is to respect this incredible diversity and have respect and learn something from it. And you know that every single day, every single creation that comes your way is there to teach you something. It's giving you a message. If your minds, if your ears, your hearts are open to that, I think you will learn something. At least the cultural tapestry in Anatolia, in Turkey today, from east to west, from north to south, is a good example. I think it's a beautiful example of how these different cultural trends, regional differences, can come together to give us a sense of how to live in unity and also in diversity, and have this perspective of unity in diversity and diversity in unity, and see it is reflected in human actions, human thoughts, human creations, in arts and sciences and other fields. And I hope you will all benefit from the opportunities that Turkey presents to you in terms of your education, in terms of your professions, in terms of your vocations. And I know that Turkey is richer, is bigger, is stronger, with you all present in it.
Barakallahu feek, Professor Kalin. We thank you for being with us here today. To the remainder of our guests, I understand there are many questions, but in keeping with this holy month of Ramadan, let's use it better to worship, and let's have some mercy on Professor Kalin. I do urge you, however, to follow Istanbul Muslim Collective on Instagram and Facebook if you missed part of the lecture. If you have any questions, please feel free to bring up the same questions with you all to please stay in touch. Professor Kalin, thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
My pleasure.
On this
Thank you.
holy night, no less, and in such a significant time for the Muslim Ummah. Thank you so much. Barakallahu feek.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
And with that, we'd like to conclude tonight's events. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a great night. And a early Eid Mubarak to everybody.
Yes, Eid Mubarak to everyone.
Assalamu alaikum
Don't forget our
wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Inshallah.
Please keep them in your du'as and please factor them into the course of your life. Jazakumullah khair.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.